Well, welcome today. I am your host, Sharon Rolfe, and you are listening to Fresh Courage coming to you on the Transformation Talk Radio Network. And I like to start with something that's good for the day. So daily, do something that brings you happiness, health, and wealth. We're going to hear quite a story today about health and wealth with Dr. Alec Hill. And I want to help you to live wholeheartedly, to enjoy everything and live boldly. So just a little tidbit about what I do is I want to ask you if you've been knocked off your feet recently by a transition, maybe like being an empty nester, retirement, or being a former caregiver, or becoming a widow. Or maybe you know somebody who has. And I know that it can leave you feeling confused or marginalized, perhaps invisible, useless, or bored. And I've gone through some of this too. So now I love helping people find a new clarity and direction again so they can experience a place, the ideal, a place to fit in, to matter, and to make a difference. I'm the creator of Effortless Vitality Plan and the Longevity Blueprint. So our topic today is living in bonus time. How many of you feel like you're living in bonus time? Alec Hill is the author of Living in Bonus Time, subtitle Surviving Cancer and Finding a New Purpose. He's been active in Young Life, studied law, and worked at World Relief, where he was resettling 1,000 refugees a year. He became a professor, a dean, and wrote a business ethics book. And now he most recently was at InterVarsity Christian Fellowship for 14 years and is a part of an incredible missional community active on 700 university campuses. Welcome, Alec. And what are we going to learn today?
Well, I guess we'll find out, but it's good to be with you, Sharon. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Well, I always would rather learn through somebody else's experience than having to learn it myself. How about you?
Well, I wish that had been the case for me, but that's certainly true, yes. But I wouldn't wish some of the things I went through on anyone else, so there you have it.
Okay. All right. Well, let's begin with your incredible journey in education and career, and specifically the last 10 years.
Yeah, so I've had two cancers, and that's kind of where the story of the book pivots. In 2011, I had a glandular cancer, which was very rare. It involved a long surgery at Mayo, and probably about a week of not knowing whether it had moved, metastasized. So that was my first brush with my own mortality, and it's what some people call an existential slap. You get hit in the face by this cold bucket of water, and it really wakes you up. But then the big show was in 2015 with the second cancer, and that was a bone marrow cancer. And it meant that virtually of my white cells, 7% had tipped, and the other 93% would eventually. And so while it's not AIDS, it's like AIDS in that your immune system is failing. And so without a bone marrow transplant, I would have died within 18 months.
So that whole process of getting the diagnosis and waiting and knowing if there's going to be a donor and all this is a huge taxing on your emotional and mental well-being, right?
Well, the elevator with the second cancer just kept going down. We had a first diagnosis, which put me at a moderate risk. And then 3 weeks later, we came out back to Seattle and got another, and they moved me into high risk. And I was declining rapidly. And so we just kept feeling like this was just going to end poorly. And then a month or two later, my brother, 25% chance of being a match, was a perfect match. And I'm here today, humanly speaking, because it was processed quickly, and my brother was an identical match. My next door neighbor at the cancer housing was not so fortunate. He had to wait 11 months to get a donor in Europe. And by the time he was scheduled to get the transplant, he was the weekend before, I kid you not, he got a cold, turned into pneumonia, and he died within 3 days. because the chemo had just eroded his immune system, and that would have been my story, probably. So I wrote the book. I have a chapter on survivor's guilt, this whole sense of why am I still here? What does life mean? What does it mean to be alive when you should have been dead? And what a gift it is, but also what a responsibility it is.
So it sounded like you had some pretty incredible leading up to this, between making a difference in lots of people's lives in your career. That was pretty satisfying.
I've had a great life. I thought with the second cancer, 62, I've packed as much in 60 years as most people do in 90. And so, Lord, if this is the time, I don't want to go, but I feel like I haven't wasted or squandered. I've had a charmed life, from doing relief and development work to being a professor for 15 years to being a dean, and then running InterVarsity, which was an absolute amazing group of people. So my life has been, like, say, charmed, except for some cancer around the edges. I might throw in that between 2011 and 2015, our youngest daughter was shot in a mugging. She's okay, so I'll say that. But when you get a call saying she's been shot in the head from an emergency room, that's a very dark moment. So we had, within 4 years, we had 3 major traumatic events in our family.
Well, so you're getting your boat rocked pretty severely, and but you had quite a foundation with your faith, right?
Yeah, I can't imagine going through this not only without family, but without God. I felt what I almost feared was that somehow there'd be some distance, but the opposite occurred. I felt his presence deeply. And there's this paradox of his presence and pain, which I don't understand, but as my pain increased, my sense of him being with me increased. I actually thought he was preparing me for death. I thought, you read about near-death experiences of a lot of people who have this sort of overwhelming spiritual sense of things, and I thought that's what was going to happen. But then, surprise, surprise, I survived. But I think I was at peace. I had made peace, and I was ready to go.
So your book has been fairly recently published, right? And you're going on. Are you doing speaking circuit now?
Well, before the coronavirus I was heading out on I had a trip canceled to Wisconsin last week, and so everything's up in the air for all of us, right? One of the interesting things is one of the chapters in the book is called The Illusion of Control. And as a cancer patient, you learn that all the things you don't control. Now, you can control the meds you take and whether you comply, but you can't control how your body's going to react. And so the coronavirus now is, a lot of people are feeling this loss of control. And the reality is we have less control than we think we do anyway. I think it's a very apt lesson to relearn for me in this period of time. So I can't get on airplanes, not because of my health, but because of what's happening in our world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be hearing how this cancer, and even your daughter, I remember being there kind of being a prayer request at church about your daughter, when that happened, and how, that is so close to home to, and it's your only daughter, is that right?
No, it's our youngest. We have 2.
2, okay. But still, no parent wants to see their child be taken out before they are. So it's incredible how much you decide to make decisions that help the process and reach for hope rather than letting it overwhelm you. Is that kind of what this is going to be about today?
There's a book that I like by a guy named Jerry Sitzer, and he lost 3 members of his family in a car accident. And he says, and one was his mother, his wife, and his daughter. And
3 generations.
Three generations, and he had 3 other kids who survived the crash. The drunk driver hit them. And, he says something very wise. He says, the best way to get to the light is not to go west following the sun and chasing it around, but to go east into the darkness, because it's the shortest distance. So I think for people in grief or in pain, our first instinct is to withdraw, to avoid. But the reality is, if we don't go through the PTSD that we suffer, if we don't talk it through, if we don't face the crisis that we went through, it'll prolong it. So I think for me, I was able to get counseling pretty early after the transplant, and that helped me go into the darkness and come into the light on the other side. It was not an easy journey. It's hard, but I think the other route, where we're in denial and avoidance, is even harder.
Okay, we're going to hear more about that when we come back from our break. So stay tuned. You're going to hear a great story today, and thanks for staying tuned. Okay, you are listening to Fresh Courage on Transformation Talk Radio Network, and I'm your host, Sharon Rolfe, and we're talking with my guest, Alec Hill, about living in bonus time. So he's been through some pretty shaking up kind of experiences, and he's going to help us. He's going to share with us a process of what he went through. So there's often, we've heard, life happens to us, but we choose how we process that stuff. And how do you go processing? How did you process having 2 cancers?
Phases. First, you go through the why me phase. Why did this? Because both of my cancers, only 500 people in the world get each one. So it's very unusual to get either of them. To get them both is almost statistically impossible. So you go through that. Then you're very thankful that you have family. And I have a wife of 40 years who I've known since I was 12 and she was 11. We didn't marry at that age, but Mary carried me through these things. 2 wonderful daughters and son-in-laws. And so, you alternate between a sense of complaint, lament, and hurt, and gratitude and hope. And it's this pendulum swing which sometimes can get rather extreme. And that's the reality of it. When the waves undulate, and so I've heard it called the law of undulation. As human beings, we go up and down with the tide. And I would say when you're in a crisis like I was, those waves get higher and lower.
Yeah, my pastor, when I lived in Texas, he would talk about it's kind of like riding a bicycle. When one's up, the other one's down, and that's how we kind of become equalized in mentally and emotionally when you have somebody that's riding the wave or the bike with you. So, did she, like, what was important about her supporting you? I don't have family, haven't married, so. I don't even want to think about having to go through that without as much support system as you had.
Freezing up here. I'm sorry, what was important about my wife's role?
Yeah, and having that support system, because even living long has been linked to people having a big support system around them.
Well, literally for 4 months after the transplant, I couldn't see anybody. I was in the hospital. I was at Seattle Cancer Care Alliance here, and my wife did everything. Mary bought the meds, negotiated. She bought the food. She cooked. She cleaned the apartment 3 times a day. Did loads of laundry literally, because I couldn't have any germs. So for 4 months, she wasn't just a caregiver. She was quasi-medical personnel. And then there was another 8 months that followed when we moved home, but I was still in quasi-isolation, so we couldn't have people in our home. I couldn't pet dogs. We couldn't have live plants. So even then, she had to play an extraordinary role of taking care of me and playing guard at the gate. And so, as we move into this coronavirus, so I'm a person who's a little bit more at risk because of my health history. So she's still having to do it. So I don't go to Fred Meyer's, goes to the store, she does. I don't buy gas, she does. Mm-hmm. So there's a sense of wonderful love, but there's also the sense of imbalance in the relationship when one person's a patient and one person's a caregiver. And we've been fortunate that it's been pretty even for 3 or 4 years now, but this new virus is starting to tip the balance a little bit. So my wife's a saint. She, whatever she wants, I do. I don't negotiate much with her anymore. I just say, whatever you want, dear. So.
That's a wise man.
It's true. I mean, my debt column is so out of balance with, with what she gives me. So I try to do whatever I can to make
it make sense.
Easier.
Yeah. So I imagine there was quite a shift between you being so globally active and becoming isolated. That must have been a huge shift for you also, another challenge or hurdle.
Well, I'm smiling because with InterVarsity, 1,700 staff, as the president, I traveled all over the country and sometimes globally. And I was on the road 40% of the time. So I had a very active life. And so going from that to being diagnosed to being sent home, all that happened in 6 weeks from diagnosis. And so it was a shock. It was a shock to my type A hyper kind of personality, my extroversion. Can you imagine what people are experiencing now with the coronavirus? That is the social distancing. I got even more than anybody else because I could, other than Mary, I couldn't see people. So, and then the question of identity, who am I now?
Yeah.
And so I lost my job. We moved from Wisconsin back to Seattle. So I lost my community. I lost my church. And I'm in isolation. So yeah, it was rather a rude shock. Now, I will say this, when you're fighting for your life and you don't think about, Maslow's hierarchy, you're not thinking about identity issues. You're just thinking about making it.
Life.
And so that set in a little later, maybe 6 months after the transplant, sort of like, who am I now questions really hit me then.
Well, and who am I questions even comes into as we retire and we don't have a title anymore. You're not the president. You're not the CEO. You're not in charge. And how does life be defined for me when I don't have those tasks to do and teams to help and problems to solve? And you are solving a totally different problem, though. Right?
Well, the gift of my cancer, and I can use gift with quotes around it, is that because I retired at the same time I got the cancer, I didn't have some of the soul-searching initial identity questions because, again, I was trying to live. But it also transformed me in a way that I began, because I couldn't be with people face to face, but I had to work. My disability ran out for 6 months. So what I started doing through InterVarsity was I was mentoring people. So I had 15 staff who were mostly 35 to 45 years of age, and I would have monthly calls with them on Zoom because I was in isolation. And I thought that was going to be a 6-month gig until I got my childhood immunization shots again, and I was going to be able to go out in public. But what happened was my heart was transformed, and I began to really love these people. And so going from a sort of a high-end strategist, glad-hander, I became a pastor, and I became a mentor, and I became an older friend. And now it's 3.5 years later, and that's still what I do. So I just called this morning with somebody in San Francisco who I love and who I've walked alongside now for 3 years. And what's amazing to me is how much I've changed, how much the hard wiring of me has gone from achievement to relationships. And it's pretty wonderful.
So that's also important for baby boomers or people retiring, is that mentoring is very gratifying, isn't it?
It's extraordinary.
You're still giving, and your way of giving is different. But I imagine you've got grandkids, and there's mentoring there too.
Well, we've got one grandchild who's only 9 months old, so no mentoring yet. She did stand up yesterday on her own for the first time, so we're very excited. We're very excited, and I will be with her all Wednesday morning. So she's the joy of our life. She lives 5 minutes from us. But yeah, the mentoring. The interesting thing about mentoring, it's not speaking at people. It's whatever their felt needs are. They bring them to you, and then you try to help them. You ask questions. You try to figure out with them. It's a partnership of how to solve a particular issue.
Okay, this is Sharon Rolfe on Fresh Courage. It's your time to shine on Transformation Talk Radio Network. And my guest today is Alec Hill, the author of Living in Bonus Time. And Alec was explaining how mentoring has been quite a rewarding event for him in the last 3 years. But I'm kind of curious, Alec, was there anything about mentoring that changed you?
Yeah, as I was saying before the break, I tend to be a hard-charging kind of personality, and when you invest yourself in people's lives and you actually care for them and love them, even though it's more, in my context, it was more of a professional mentoring, but you still just really like these people, and most of them are, like I say, 35 to 45 years old, younger than me. You begin to feel in your own soul kind of this growing empathy and love and care.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I regularly would pray for these people. And it just, I was so pleased. Like I said, I sort of became pastoral in the sense of an older man loving these younger staff. And it was wonderful. I mean, it is wonderful. It's changed me. And by the way, I will say research shows that when you've had a crisis in your life, often what will happen is achievement becomes less important and people become more important. And that's exactly what's happened to me. So not only I think I'm giving some value to these folks, but this whole process has changed me for the better.
Quite amazing. I bet it was kind of unexpected for you, right?
Well, it was a hand that I was dealt that the whole thing was unexpected. But I will say this, I was 62, I was thinking about retirement in a couple of years anyway, so I was already psychologically moving towards kind of retirement, but then the cancer hit and it just sped everything up, and there was no graceful goodbye. There was no victory tour of going around seeing people and getting loved on. I just was shunted out and into the hospital pretty quickly. And but the sweet sequel to that story is now I've been able to go back to Wisconsin, where the headquarters is, a couple times, and just feel the love of people. And it's my life again is pretty wonderful.
So, our audience, it's bound to be that they have also had surprises, and health has challenged them and caused them to change direction. And we all have life uncertainties happen to us. So these challenges affect our courage. And what kept you from giving up?
I didn't realize it until later when I started doing the research that people who go through major traumas are 1/3 will years later say that they actually grew or were bolder or more courageous or more resilient. 1/3 will say that they 1/3 will say that greatly affected them. 1/3 will say it was moderately they improved in those areas, and 1/3 will say nothing, that they regressed or that it was. That means that 2 out of 3 people who go through a major trauma, and you fill in the blank what that trauma is, actually say that they're better for it, not in terms of the pain or the limitations they have in their bodies, but in terms of who they are as people. So what I thought was unique to me, that I was this remarkably courageous person, that I gutted it out, is not the case. It's the majority of us. Isn't that amazing?
Well, and I think that's what life is kind of about. If we're not learning from our situation, then you might have to go through it more than once. And let's learn the first time and be open to what's in this. The lesson in this is kind of what you experience?
Well, I laughed because I thought my first cancer, okay, Lord, you've got my attention. I think I've learned a lesson. And then 4 years later, boom, the second one. So I must be very thick-headed. I didn't get, but I do tend to think that there's a randomness to pain that means we can't ascribe it to ourselves or sometimes even to God. It's just part of the human condition and where we live. But I do think Michael J. Fox, who has Parkinson's, the actor, he says, I can't control how my body reacts, but I can control how kind I am to others. I can control my attitude. So I think we have to realize what's appropriate control rather than excessive or over control, which most of us are probably guilty of.
Yeah, it's so rewarding to see postings on Facebook and so forth with this coronavirus and how people are trying to think about how can they impact somebody else positively and do for them that when they can't do for themselves. So I am so encouraged by people looking at what can be done rather than what have I lost. So and I like to inspire possibilities. So transitions can leave us confused or feel marginalized. In your isolation, that's certainly marginalized. I'm really challenged by anyone having to go through that. Thank you for listening to Fresh Courage. It's your time to shine on Transformation Talk Radio Network. And I'm your host, Sharon Rolfe, with my guest, Alec Hill. We're talking about living in bonus time, Alec's newly released book. And I love to encourage and inspire possibilities in others. And but, transitions can leave us confused and marginalized at time, and Alec certainly was marginalized with his isolation. So we already mentioned that your transition often will include something like the loss of your identity. Retirers may experience that, and how do you handle it and getting through it without getting depressed or stuck is kind of the litmus test here. So, Alec, how did you handle the emotional side of this 2 times cancer?
Well, I think sadness is a normal emotion, so it's not something to be kept at bay. It's something that we go through. So when I was first diagnosed, there was deep sadness. When I went through horrific medical procedures with chemo and full body radiation and steroids, I had 0 white cell counts for 23 days. I was taking 50 pills a day. And so I could give you more detail, but that was sad. And then there was 6 months after the transplant, and it was deemed successful. I got more sad because of the friends I'd lost, the people who had been around me. So I think that the key here is not to avoid sadness, but to recognize it as normal, then to do all that we can to build up through our faith, through our families, through our friends, an ability to cope with that sadness and to move through it. But it can't be avoided. I mean, there is just an element of loss at every level when the elevator is going down.
Well, and to deny it is kind of where that stuckness happens, right?
That's right. It's a necessary step to returning to emotional health. I recognize that what was interesting, like I said, it was 6 months after I had the transplant, and I had a 90% chance of living. And that was good because that was a lot better than it had been before. And I went into about a 3-month funk, and I was just, it wasn't suicidal. It was just sadness, and it was just this sense of heavy. And it was such an anomaly because I thought, well, here I am, I'm going to live. I'm one of the fortunate ones, and yet I was sad every day.
Yeah.
And I found out later that that's really common. That's a very common reaction. I wish I'd been told that in advance. I didn't know it was coming.
So you dealt with it and kept feeling the sadness instead of blocking it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I talked about it. I got counseling. I let my wife know. And it wasn't, I mean, on a 1 to 10 scale, it's probably a 5. I mean, it wasn't really, I wouldn't call it depression. I would just call it sadness, but it bordered on depression. And I think because I've lived long enough, I recognized it, and I didn't, it didn't, now, if you get to an 8 on the depression scale, I think then it becomes more overwhelming and more serious. I never got to that pitch, but it was very real. And I'd say, I go to funerals now. I had a friend die of melanoma recently, and I went to his funeral, and I went to a very hard place because I'm here and he's gone. And every time I lose a friend, it comes back and bites me. So grief or sadness isn't something that goes away forever. It's like a dog that sort of roams back in uninvited. but if you know it's coming, and you can almost start anticipating it, then you can kind of get ready for it and live with it for a while. Who was it? Churchill called it the black dog. The black dog would just circle around and show up at his door sometimes, and people have different causes for that.
Yeah, I remember I did a singles convention here back in the mid 80s, and our director knew that after you do a huge event, there's often an emotional letdown. And he said he had to learn that you always have another plan in the, off stage to move on to, so you don't get stuck there. And I appreciated so much him sharing what to expect, because I remember like the week or so afterwards, I was out in my garden planting some new bulbs, and I thought, why are you out here? This is well, I'm an introvert, so it felt good to me, but being happy with where you are is how I process it, that I'm putting gas in my tank while I'm working in my garden. So you had some other emotions, like depending on others was really a challenge for you. Is that right, Alec?
Yeah, I wrote a chapter in the book about that as kind of a rugged individualist or self-perceived, that I didn't like to have to depend, and that's typical of men, right? I mean, men are worse than this than women by far. We don't like to admit that we can't do something. So I was on my back literally for months and was unable. And then even after that, as I sort of crawled out physically. So again, dependence on not only my wife, but on my daughters, on neighbors, on friends, certainly on the medical profession, on nurses. And it became, how do I say, I think some of that pride of independence was purged out of me. And now I'm better at it. I mean, I seem to, I think it's a myth. It's a myth that we're independent, right? It's just a myth. And it's like the illusion of control. So what I hope to do now is pay back some, right? I hope to be able to help others who may be more dependent than I am. So during this coronavirus, I was just thinking about crisis. I can't physically do things for people because of my susceptibility, but I have a lot of friends who are older who I can call and I can reach out to, and that's what I'm doing.
Well, and I've been really surprised and encouraged. In the condo I live in, the board decided that they would create a phone tree and call each one of us on a daily basis. So I've had like 3 or 4 calls now from a neighbor, and that helps with coping with this isolation. And it's now making my wheels turn, like, how can I do that for someone else? And I did pick up the phone this weekend a couple times and try to reach out to people that I hadn't talked to for a while. So
I do think that's part of our emotional and spiritual health, is that to turn from victims into people who are serving other people. And this virus and the isolation, we can either, we do have to physically withdraw, but emotionally we have to reach out to each other. And I like your story, because that gives us, there's something enervating and energizing about when we are proactively caring for others.
Yeah. So let's ask the key question here is, how has bonus time changed you?
Well, I think in so many ways. we haven't talked about purpose, but I guess, moving from doing things, projects to being with people is one. Caring more about today than tomorrow. I used to be a very future-oriented person, and when your time span is limited, you begin to appreciate and savor the moments more. So on one hand, I'm even more intentional about how I spend my days now, but I'm also more relaxed. And so, if I have a drive from point A to point B, sometimes now I'll take the slower route if it's more attractive. And in my past, I'd always go the fastest route. So I'm trying to be a better listener. I think I am, and I think the empathy gene has gone way up. One thing I noticed this week is that when I make a mistake and I hurt someone, it hurts me much more deeply than it used to. I hold on. So when I fail someone, I feel it. And that kind of stinks because I don't like that kind of lingering pain. But what it's a healthy symptom of, right? It's very healthy and wonderful that I care more now. And I feel more. So the upsides are higher, but like you have this little niche that kind of digs in your soul a little bit, right? But I feel my mistakes a lot more, and that's good. That's really good.
So I think I hear you saying that life is a gift now.
Oh, it's always been a gift. I think I realize it more now. And my daughter's wedding, my granddaughter's birth, all the milestones that I would have missed, and here I am. So I am really a Lazarus who came back from the dead, and I'm able to wander around and be part of people's lives. And so the metaphor of bonus time comes from soccer, where they play the 90 minutes, and then at the end, the refs add this extra time on for penalties or other things that happen, and they know when so it's not like basketball. It's a really weird system. So bonus time, you can play anywhere from 2 minutes to 20 minutes beyond the 90 minutes. So my regulation 90 minutes ended, and now I'm in this bonus time, and I want to live it in a way that really counts, and I really want to make it matter. It's one of the reasons I wrote the book.
It's interesting. I have recently come to know someone who had a near-death experience too, and he sounds very much like what you're saying, that just being grateful for today, now, loving this day is a strong message in his life now too. So anything motivating you now, or what are you working on, Alec?
So I'm teaching again. I was a professor for 20 years, and I am back teaching in Canada and here in Seattle, and then possibly in Boston. And I find that being with students gives me great life again. And so I'm doing less in the way of boards and some other things that I used to do. And again, it's more direct. It's more person to person, and less organizational. I'll put it that way.
So let's talk about how people can get your book and how they can reach you in case they're interested in contacting you. Tell us about that.
Well, just go on Amazon, look up Living in Bonus Time. My name is Alec Hill, and you'll find the book. It's been up since January 7th, and so that'd be easy. And then, Sharon, if someone wanted to reach me, could they reach me through you? In other words, do they have access to you?
Yes, they do.
So I suggest that they contact you, and then you forward it to me.
Okay.
I'm in conversations all the time with people, particularly with cancers. I mean, that's kind of an area. And so I got an email this morning from a doctor in South Carolina who's going through, and so the book is opening a lot of doors for me to have those conversations with people, and that's part of my calling. To do that.
Well, and to be an open vessel like that, so many people nowadays are actually realizing, talking about it and sharing our life experiences helps us bridge the separation between us. So I want to encourage you, my audience, to rate and review my show whenever they look at or listen to my podcast. My website is at effortlessvitality.org. And you can find me on Facebook and these little quilt blocks that I make. Here's one: Cherish Forever, What Makes You Unique. I like unique stuff. They're available on Quilted Petunia, store on the Etsy website. And you'll often find me doing a thought for the week where I talk about the meaning of my little blocks, the words of wisdom that I put on them. So, Dr. Hill, I want to thank you for being on my show today and the message, and hope that you've been sharing with us.
Well, Sharon, my pleasure, and hope to see you again in church some Sunday.
Yeah, he was able to speak to us recently, and that's how I met Alec Hill, and we probably lived pretty close to each other if we knew the details. But I, again, want to encourage you to daily do something that brings you health, happiness, health, and wealth. That's a good remedy or motto for retirement. And we're going to have an interesting guest next week that's going to talk about happiness and wealth together. So that's sometimes people think that that's either or. It would be best and the richest, meaningful life if they were together. So again, I'm inspiring possibilities and purpose, and effortlessvitality.org is my website, and my email is sharon@effortlessvitality. And I appreciate my audience and want to encourage you to let us know that you're listening and that you are able to rate and review, because we need to know the size of our audience, and that helps us with that, and we sincerely appreciate it. So come back and listen to us next week, and I look forward to continuing Fresh Courage. It's your time to shine. Thanks for listening.